And visit, you can be seated. We have a few guests today. Steve Johnson is visiting our club. Thank you for coming, Steve. And Brian Dieter brought a guest of the club. Or of it.
Good afternoon. My name is Brian Dieter, and it's nice to be back with you. And I brought with me Roger Parker. Roger is the director of all things information technology related at Mary Greeley Medical Center and has a volunteer event to benefit Wings of Refuge, and seemed like a natural to bring along.
At this time, Louis will sing our welcome song.
And you're all going to have to sing loudly.
Thank you, Louis. We've got some birthdays this month. Happy birthday to that list of people. And should we do birthdays and anniversaries at the same time? Let's do that. And also anniversary for a few people. Jennifer and Paul Ellis, happy anniversary. And then, go ahead. Okay, thank you very much. All right, we have a couple. Don Goring, 63 years. Round of applause. And let's also give a round of applause for Jody Stumbo, 4 years. We need to celebrate the bookends. Thank you very much. I think we don't need to sing, but happy Rotary anniversary. Thank you. At this time, I would like to invite Jim Baker up to introduce our speaker.
Guess I have to lower it just a little bit. Our guest speakers today are Angie Bright and Brandy Young from Wings of Refuge. Wings of Refuge is a Christ-centered organization providing opportunities to survivors of sex trafficking. Angie's the executive director and has been with the organization for 2 years. Prior to that, she was in a commercial banker in Ankeny for 16 years. She and her husband have 3 children, one in high school, one at son at Iowa State, and a daughter at UMKC. Brandy is the development director of Wings. She grew up on a farm in Illinois. Her career path has included the corporate world at John Deere, local ministries, and overseas missions. She's a co-founder of Field of Hope, a Christian nonprofit dedicated to agriculture education in an extension in Uganda. She lives here in Central Iowa with her husband, Steve, and their adorable pup, Stella. And she's a stepmom to 3 adult children. So Angie and Brandy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. So I'm Brandy. And this is Angie, our executive director, and she's going to join me at the end when we open it up for Q&A. So thank you so much for having us. It really is a joy and an honor to be here with you. I have the privilege of sharing just an overview, not only of Wings of Refuge, but also just the issue of human trafficking, specifically the issue of sex trafficking, which impacts not only our world, but also our state and community. And so the way that I will share today is I thought we'd do an overview of what trafficking is. Oftentimes we think that we have an exact picture of what that is, but there's a lot of confusion and misconception, kind of what that looks like here in Iowa. And then specifically we'll shift to, and what do we do about it? And that's kind of the more encouraging, uplifting of it is a really dark issue. And that's not where we want to leave us, but yet talk about where is the hope and how do we engage? So I'm going to see if I can figure out, it's always wonderful when technology works, isn't it? So what is Wings of Refuge? Wings of Refuge is a long-term safe home that provides opportunities for healing and restoration to survivors of sex trafficking. So I'll kind of focus in on 3 different areas. The first is our restoration home. This is where we spend a lot of our energy in programming. The second is our transitional living center. This is a place that we opened up now it's 2022. So it would be a year ago. It was March of last year. And that is kind of a step toward independent living after the restoration home, before maybe the survivors would get their own apartment. And then lastly, I'll touch on our social enterprise. And this is a program that we have that lets the women start working in a trauma-informed, safe work environment as she works and saves for her future. So before we get started, I just wanted to cover our overall mission is so exploitation ends for one more girl. You'll hear us a lot, or if you follow us on social media, we use the tagline or the hashtag for one more girl. And the reason why we do that is because, as I'll share at the beginning of this presentation, this is a dark issue. And the more that we learn about how often it's happening and what it looks like, it can feel overwhelming and dark. And sometimes you wonder if you're actually making a difference. And so for us, we keep that one more girl. There's one more girl out there that is waiting to be recovered. There's one more girl out there that could benefit from a place of healing and restoration. And so while the statistics might be big and the issue might be dark, we're going to keep our focus on one more girl. So I wanted to start just with some level setting, as I shared, and say, what is trafficking? Specifically today, we are talking about sex trafficking, which is a form of human trafficking. You can have labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Wings of Refuge specifically provide services to female survivors of sex trafficking. So we call it a form of modern day slavery in which individuals are forced to perform commercial sex acts for the profit of others through force, fraud, or coercion. We do call it's not typically maybe how we use the word slavery, but we do use that very intentionally because they're not in control of their lives, in their bodies. Someone else is controlling that for them. So it really is a form of modern day slavery. The other words I want you to pay attention there are force, fraud, and coercion. I'll share a little bit later how it can look different, but often different is because of that fraud and coercion. Many times when we think about trafficking, we picture one scenario, and it typically in our minds comes or looks like that physical force. But oftentimes the traffickers are much more sneaky and they have tactics that are very dark, not only with physical force, but include more of that fraud and coercion, almost a tricking into the life. So I wanted to start at a global scale. So what are we talking about in the world? There's an estimated 27 million slaves in our world, and that would put more people in slavery today than any other time in history. Now, I will share, while I have that 27 million, That number is very debated depending what you categorize under trafficking. Either way, we know the statistics that I will share here today are typically grossly underrated because most of the time in the trafficking cases and statistics, the only numbers that we can keep track of are those that are reported. And we know that there's actually a significantly higher number of cases or incidents that's happening than what's actually reported. But if we just, again, look at the global scale, we're looking potentially at 27 million people. And now I want to drill down a little and look at nationally. So if we just look at the US, so many times when we talk about trafficking, it's easy to picture this being a global or an international issue, but it's harder to get our minds wrapped around that this is happening here. Unfortunately, sex trafficking has been documented in all 50 states. And that's not something that I say up here like I'm proud of that number. It's just a humbling statistic when we start to realize this isn't something that's happening far away. It's not something actually that's only happening in big cities. It's happening across the US. So let's go ahead and narrow down, take a little narrower picture, and we're gonna look locally just at Iowa. So you may have heard, and I've got in the corner here, Iowa is one of the crossroads of domestic sex trafficking in the US. One of the reasons for that is the interstates that cross section between I-80 and 35. But I'll just take a moment here to say it doesn't require an interstate for trafficking to happen. So I mentioned I want to kind of keep dripping in that trafficking can look different and often does look different than what sometimes we have one picture. So many times when we picture trafficking, we think about the transportation of people. But unfortunately, trafficking can happen under someone's own roof. A woman or a person, both men and women, can be trafficked. I will often say a woman because Wings of Refuge specifically provides services to women. But people that are trafficked don't have to cross state lines, city lines, but things like interstates make it more likely that they could be transported in for particular events. So maybe you've heard that sometimes special events can increase trafficking. Why does that happen? Because demand increases. So typically traffickers follow where demand. So sometimes a special event will draw in or cause higher demand. And that's when you start to think about those interstates impacting the amount of trafficking that's happening because it makes transporting the people that are being trafficked to those events more likely. If we look at Wings in Iowa, 35% of the survivors that come to our home are from Iowa. 56% of the inquiries we get are from women who were trafficked in Iowa. So that number obviously fluctuates with each participant that comes. But in general, yes, we are getting women who are from or trafficked in Iowa. And so now I want to drill down a little further and look at each individual woman. So the truth is the average age of entry into the commercial sex exploitation is during the teenage years. Now we at Wings take adult survivors. However, most of them either suffered some kind of trauma in their childhood that set them up to be vulnerable to be trafficked, or their trafficking started when they were teens. So many times we will get people, we will get participants, and they could have been trafficked for a week, a month, a year, or a decade. And each woman's story is very different. So many times the trafficking may have started in the teenage years, and there's reasons for that. It's because of her vulnerability. And so that's kind of what I want to look at next. And if you look, there are some brochures on your table, and you'll be able to see some of these factors that you see on the left-hand side here. Anyone could be targeted to be trafficked but there are certain factors that makes them more likely to be vulnerable, more likely to be trafficked. So I've got a few here. There are a few in those brochures at the center of your table. But Polaris recently, it's a website we use that offers some great statistics for the issue of trafficking, released the top 5 risk factors or vulnerabilities are substance use concerns, runaway or homeless youth, unstable housing, mental health concerns, or recent migration or relocation. And so this is where I want to pause and just paint some pictures here of how this can look. And I want to come back to those words at the beginning of the presentation that was force, fraud, or coercion. So why do we think traffickers prey on vulnerable people? Any guesses? They make easier targets, right? So the more vulnerable or the factors that someone has, the more likely that a trafficker can come in and fill those gaps or be the solution that that vulnerable person needs. And so how many of you have seen the movie Taken with Liam Neeson? Some hands go up. So often that is our one picture of what trafficking looks like. For those of you who have not seen that movie, his daughter is kidnapped when she travels overseas and is going to be forced into the trade. And Liam Neeson gets really strong and courageous to go rescue his daughter. However, that's not typically what domestic sex trafficking looks like. So I'll just tell a story that isn't about an individual person, but just this is a scenario that a vulnerable woman could be targeted. So let's say you have a youth that has run away from home and gets on a bus to New York City. I've heard stories of traffickers waiting at places that they know that potentially vulnerable youth will be getting off the bus. And then maybe he goes up to her and he can tell that she looks scared. And then he offers either a ride or he might pose and pretend like he's interested in her and then purposely groom her is the term to kind of be her boyfriend or be the things that she needs. Maybe he puts her up in an apartment that he's paying for. And then all of a sudden, fast forward a day, a week, a month, and he flips the switch. And now it's time for you to start paying me back for all that I've been providing for you. And there are many dark tactics of how he keeps her there. Maybe he has pictures of her family. He uses threats. He uses coercion. He uses that form of force through fear that is going to keep her in that scenario and unable to leave. Now, I know that story is a little bit darker than probably what we want to sit on, but it's those types of stories that get these women in scenarios that it's not a life that they chose. They ended up there from a lack of choices, and now that trafficker is controlling. Oh, I about told you to click forward. I guess I'm in control of that. And so I just want to pause here and say, so what do we do, right? Like all of those scenarios, and as I mentioned, there's a million different ways that people have gotten brought into this life. Now, what do we do about it? Because you can focus on the dark statistic, and it is dark, or you can ask that question, now what are we going to do? And so together we fight. Through Wings of Refuge, we have 4 different kind of ways that we reach out to fight this issue. Reach, recover, restore, and rise. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at those. So first, it begins with you. We're going to start with that reach piece. We believe that education is a step toward empowering us to end exploitation. So just like this, you're here, you're learning about the issue. We think the more that we can spread awareness and education, not only so that you're educated of how you can support survivors, but also just being good citizens, how we can keep our eyes open to how this might be happening in our communities. So thank you. This is step 1, is just the education piece. And then recover. So we network with others who recover survivors. So we aren't the ones typically going door to door recovering survivors from those situations, but we're very well networked with those who do, such as law enforcement, trafficking hotlines, social service agencies, homeless shelters, mental health advocates, and other safe homes. So many people ask, how do the women find you at Wings? It's through one of these avenues typically. We're on every referral list we know to be on. When people who are trained help identify people to be survivors of sex trafficking, then we are on all those referral lists if they're ready to kind of take that next step and do their healing in a safe home. Then I mentioned at the beginning, the restoration home. So our safe home is staffed 24/7. The first priority for us here is that you help the women establish safety. So many of them have maybe never known a safe home all of their life. So as I mentioned, typically it's vulnerable people that are targeted. Sometimes that means that the girls that are targeted had very traumatic or unstable childhoods, let alone what happened in their trafficking situation. So number one, we want to help them establish safety. And then we have a host of other services depending on their needs. So we're not medical professionals, but we work in the community with those who are. So if there's medical help that needs to happen, therapeutic programming, goal setting, education, depending on what her goals are, helping her kind of take steps to determine what she wants to do with her future. We are a Christ-centered organization, so there's an opportunity and exploration in faith, as well as life skills. You know, sometimes it's just simply learning how to do life, to do laundry, to clean, you know, just live safely and normally in a home. And so while they are with us, it's not just a roof over their head. It's truly an environment, one, that feels like family, that feels like a true home. So it doesn't feel like an institution. It feels like they're at home. And two, where they can start processing through their trauma so that it will help take them healthy steps toward their future. And then I mentioned the Transitional Living Center. So we realized that when they are in our safe home and it's staffed 24/7 and they have all kinds of programming and resources, when they graduate from that program, let's say roughly a year, we work with each woman depending how long they need to be in the program, but let's estimate it about a year. It was a really big step then to step into their own apartment into full independent living. And so now we have this middle step called the Transitional Living Center. It's a beautiful home that was redone, has 5 micro apartments upstairs. And if they need kind of that next step where they're going to have less structure, but still have access to the wing staff, to programming if they choose, now we're able to offer living in the Transitional Living Center. So I just wanted to pause and tell a quick story. I know you probably can't see this really well from where you are, but hopefully you can tell on this side, the left side, it looks dark and gray, and on the right side, it looks brighter and white. So the Transitional Living Center has its own transformation story. This is a home that was gifted to us from YSS after it had sustained a fire. There was significant smoke damage through the home. And so quite frankly, when it was first offered, it didn't really feel like a gift. In fact, our founder first said, thanks, but no thanks, I think a couple times, and said, we do not want that home. But then after we had a contractor go through it, he determined that, you know, the bones are still good and that we really felt like the home had a lot of potential. And I'm telling you, we got to see one miracle after another as organizations, people, churches in the community rallied around this property and just absolutely transformed it, you know, all the way down, tearing out, you know, all of the burned, charred things. And then now it is this beautiful home. It became very apparent that that home kind of mimics the journey that our women often go through. When they first come to us, as you can imagine, the amount of trauma that they have endured and just their life feels a little bit like it's in that charred, destroyed state. and then watch them start to take those steps toward their healing journey where they step into wholeness. They start to see their dignity and their worth just returned. And so to us, it's this constant reminder of what is possible in the whole transformation process. So that's our TLC. And then I mentioned the social enterprise. So this was actually started. So this is opportunities that our women have to work. They get paid. They're hired by Wings when they're in the program to get paid and start saving. And basically it helps them just lay a healthy foundation for what a healthy work environment can look like. And so as I mentioned, when they first come to us, a lot of their worth is tied up in what they do or their bodies. And they're very obsessed just with how much money they can bring in because that's what they've been programmed or trained to do. And so this is an opportunity. It's called One More, our social enterprise, where they get to start taking steps toward learning what it looks like to have a healthy job. And so this was started because one of our survivors wanted to save money to get an emotional support dog. So she knew how to make the beaded leather wrap bracelets that you see on the corner there. She started making the bracelets. Of course, all the staff bought them in no time, and she had the money, and now she has the dog. And just that inspired us to say, well, if not for her, then, we could provide these opportunities for the rest of the women in the house. So we still make the bracelets, but we also have a partnership with Oak Lane Candle where the women pick out the scents, pour the candles. That's on Main Street in Ames. And then we recently we have a new partnership with Tailored Expressions, which is located in Ankeny. And they make all the materials to make homemade cards. And so our women are going to be trained to make homemade cards. And so when they make these products, then we sell them at speaking events and whatnot. And that money goes back into the ministry. And so I will tell you just, once one of our women started pouring candles, she came out of the candle store that day and turned around and said, I work there. With just like this proud, as she should, just her dignity in place because she's earning clean money. And so it's just a beautiful program where, sometimes people ask me, so are you trying to, teach them that they're going to pour candles the rest of their life? No, I mean, certainly if they want to, but it's more about just the experience that they're gaining through these employment options, networking with the people they're working with. And so it's just been a beautiful program that the women really enjoy. Part of our social enterprise that is brand new this year is we implemented a savings program where they're invited to put a percentage of their paycheck into a savings account. And upon graduation, Wings will match that money up to a certain amount so that they, are starting out with a nice base when they leave the program as well. And so eventually what are we working toward is the launch from Wings when she gets to graduate and live in her freedom. I've got a quote on the screen here. It says, at Wings, I got my life back. No, actually, I got my life for the first time. And that is how many of the women feel of this is the first time that I have actually saw life modeled like this, where I feel safe, where I feel loved, where my dignity is in place. And so it is a difficult journey toward healing and wholeness. There's lots to process through. And that's why we celebrate every tiny, big, and small win along their journey with the women, is just watching them take steps toward that healing, toward that wholeness is honestly, truly an honor. And so the question that I get after sharing more than any other is usually, what can I do? Once you start to learn about just the issue of trafficking, it does feel overwhelming. And so I just want to encourage you, and again, this visual is in your those brochures in front of you as well, but your path starts, there at the top when you learn about the problem and you can get connected. Her path, of course, is heading on the same trajectory, we hope, which is bringing her to the Wings safe house. And so when we are able to support survivors, sex trafficking ends. And so now you might recognize this face, looks a little different here, but one of our guests, he didn't know his picture was going to be in the presentation, Roger Parker, that was introduced at the beginning. But I had the opportunity to share with his church in Story City last spring. And I got to this part where I share, do what you love to fight what you hate. When people ask that question, what can I do to stop trafficking? We like to kick that back and say, what do you already do? What are you already good at? What are you passionate about? What brings you, what makes you get excited? Can you do that in some way to support survivors? And so we have had people who love to golf, plan golf tournaments. We have had little girls who wanted to do a lemonade stand that would sell lemonade in the summer and then send a check with their proceeds to Wings of Refuge. And then, yes, we had Susan and Roger. They heard this and they came up to me afterwards and said, oh my gosh, we were already thinking about doing a 3D archery shoot. For those archery people, that's shooting bow and arrow against 3D targets. And we want to turn that into a fundraiser. And so that little seed that was planted turned into $30,000 for Wings of Refuge last year. And so I share that big number, and that can almost scare you, like, oh my gosh, how would I do an event at 30,000? But you know what? We are just as touched by those two girls that gave us that $30 check from the lemonade stand. So there's nothing too big, nothing too small. It's however you're wired and whatever interests you. We love coming alongside you and seeing the way that you can be used against this fight against trafficking. So do what you love to fight what you hate. Excuse me. And so lastly, we also have the opportunity. Sometimes I'll get the question, what if I want to volunteer at the organization? We do have volunteer training that we offer twice a year, and that just helps get you equipped so that you understand what it looks like to be trauma informed, what it can look like to volunteer in the home. We only let females volunteer in the home, but male and female come to the volunteer training. Sometimes we do have men's groups or youth groups that might help with yard projects and things like that. But just for trigger responses, we do only allow women in the home. But if you are interested in learning more, whether you end up volunteering or not, we would encourage you to consider our volunteer training coming up on April 23rd. It's linked on our website. That'll be hosted by Cornerstone Church, just to learn more. And so with that, I'm going to invite Angie up and have a time of Q&A. And I always like to say here in this part, there's no dumb question. I know it was a lot of information. And so if you have something that you're sitting wondering on, someone else may be too. So thank you for your time, but we would love to hear from just a few of you. And it always takes the first brave soul to ask the question. Are there any questions here today?
At 100% capacity, is there a wait list? Where are you at with that, with individuals needing to get into your program?
Yeah, so he said, are we at capacity? We do have openings right now. It fluctuates. So our capacity is we can take 5 women in our safe home, 5 women in our transitional living center, so a total of 10. We are not, yeah, am I saying that right? We do have openings right now. And that changes, it can change moment to moment, like we're getting ready to welcome new participants. And so, yeah, typically we have, I would say, availability, but we currently do, so.
Yes, yep. We actually originated in Iowa Falls and then moved to the Ames area in 2019. And so, yeah, both of our locations are in Ames.
I have a question. When I worked with the Ames Convention and Visitors Bureau, we did some training for the hotels on spotting and knowing what to look for. Is that something you've done, or how would you respond?
As far as gone through the training or provided?
Providing training and is that important? Is that somewhere that it's typically seen?
I think what we're finding a lot of is that a lot of the women don't even know that they've been exploited or trafficked. I think they think that they've just been in a relationship with their boyfriend that they love. And so a lot of times we don't even, or we see a lot of situations where they don't maybe even know. So it's very helpful for advocates or people to know what the signs are to look for. And so we do have a list on our website, I believe, that that shares a list of red flags and things to look for. And we have just recently been talking to, like this morning, we had a meeting with Access, which is a domestic violence shelter in Ames, and talked about doing a little mini training session with them, or even just a list of the things to look for. And I know also we've talked to Susan Parker about connecting with Mary Greeley and starting some of those conversations, I think would be helpful to share with people in the community. So.
And just in general, when you think about what to look for, I heard a detective answer once, like, number one, the absence of normal. So if you're looking at a situation and something, it doesn't mean for sure trafficking's happening, but it just doesn't look normal, lean in and pay attention. But in general, you're looking for situations that the women or the people don't seem to be in control. Like maybe somebody is dropping off and picking up from the employer, but it's more like you might see kids, like you think about dropping kids off at a place, but it's adults, and that doesn't seem right, you know? So it's there isn't exact signs to look for, but we do have things listed of just lean in, pay attention. If there's a question, call the hotline, you know, call the trafficking hotline, or 911 and report factually what you're seeing.
We are funded by all private donations and church partnerships. We do not take any funding from state or federal because we want to remain Christ-centered. And so, and able to do that, we rely on private donations and church partnerships and fundraisers.
Jeannie Rogert has a question in the chat box. Do you have women who would like to volunteer at Food at First and other places like that?
Oh,
Like your participants or your residents that would like to volunteer in the community?
oh yeah. From time to time we do. I think it just depends on, so if our participants would want to volunteer out in the community. Yeah, from time to time we do have participants that do. I know we also sometimes have opportunities at Overflow, and we have a partnership with Overflow as well. So currently I don't think do, but yeah.
Just to follow up on Allison's question about the hotels, last year the state passed a law requiring any hotels receiving state dollars. So if they have visitors coming to Ames that will be paying the hotel with state dollars, that they're required to go through certification for sex trafficking. And as of today, 21 of the 22 hotels in Ames have gone through that trafficking certification process. And it's not an easy just click the box kind of thing. So the hotels are well aware of it, and it's a really good law that has been passed. So just an FYI.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. We have women come in 18 and older. Yeah, there is a home in Pella that serves sex traffic survivors for minors. So we do have a connection with them if we were to receive a referral less than 18. Oh, how do we protect the women? I mean, we have both of our homes are secure with a security system and cameras, and unfortunately, yeah, I mean, it could be a security risk. And I think in the 8 years that Wings has been in existence, we have not had any issues that have happened. Definitely something that we take seriously, and protecting our women. We have everyone that comes to our home sign a confidentiality agreement, and we're very selective of who can come to our homes, really just staff and board members. Every once in a while, from time to time, a volunteer who's taking our participants from here to there, but pretty selective on who can know the location. Sadly, a lot of, it's they're commodities a lot of the time, so they're not really looking, they'll just go on to the next girl. Well, there's a youth shelter in Des Moines. I know there's YSS here, so there's opportunities for the kids to go to. A lot of the women that we serve, or I shouldn't say a lot, but some of the women we serve, they have potentially gotten out of their trafficking situation, but they've never received healing or trauma care or any opportunity to even work on their trauma. So they may have been safe physically for a period of time, or even maybe since their childhood. They just have not ever been able to work on moving past that. And so we've been able to serve women in that situation as well.
And sometimes I alluded to this earlier, but the women that come to us, their trafficking may have started younger, but they're adults now, like it just went on for either that long. And so, yeah, and typically a safe home has to decide what their kind of specialty or focus is. For us, there's a lot of different complications and whatnot when you take minors. And so for Wings, when the ministry was established, decided that kind of our niche was going to be adults, but that doesn't, like, you want to help everyone, obviously. And that's where it's just really important for us to be well networked and refer those, if we do get younger, to an appropriate place that they can, seek healing and housing as well.
Do you track the success rate of people that have come out of your program in terms of kind of what happens X number of years after they've completed the program?
Yeah, so we stay in touch with the women as long after they leave the program, as long as they stay in touch with us, like it's not a mandatory thing. And so we keep track of them as long as they're open to that. So I don't have hard numbers. It's just, we're in relationship with those that we still know of. The women are always welcome if they stay in the area and they want to continue to access services even after they're living independently in their own apartment. Sometimes we'll be contacted by a previous participant. The funny story that comes to mind for me is we were contacted by one that said, hey, those finance classes that I was taking while I lived there, yeah, I didn't really pay attention. And now that I'm paying my bills, I realized that I could have benefited from that. Can I come back and take the classes? And so we have some and of course we're happy to do that. But so we have those opportunities when they stay in touch with us. And so, yeah, so the long, maybe the short and the long answer is we stay in touch with those and we keep, tabs on them as long as they stay in touch with us, but that isn't a requirement of the program.
Do the women who come to you, do they have children with them or children elsewhere? And how does that track?
Yeah, so we do not take children in our home. So sometimes they have children. Sometimes they're grown and sometimes every situation is different. So sometimes there's custody things happening where someone else has primary custody or whatnot. But either way, the children don't come with them. We do support them in whatever way we can, like if they're in legal proceedings or whatnot. There is one home that I know of in Iowa, just south of Des Moines area, that does take women with kids, Garden Gate Ranch. And so again, if we get a referral with a woman with a child, they take kids under 4. We would refer to them. And if they would get a referral, women without kids, they'd refer to us. So
I'll just share a brief story if it's okay.
Sure.
I'm an old 4-H'er, and from that organization came the story of the state fair. It was actually this last year that in the livestock barns, 2 young females were attempted or had attempt to take them away. And they made enough noise and knew enough people. That did not happen.
We currently do not. I'm not sure if we have in the past, but yeah, that would be a really good idea.
probably not teach it, but we might partner with someone that
Yeah.
already is and take our women that way. That's typically what we end up doing is If we're asked or if the women have an interest to do something that we're not offering, then we would find someone in the community that.
Healthcare is expensive. I mean, do you find them health insurance to cover their expenses, or do you help them with those medical costs?
A lot of times, they have Medicaid and Medicaid or Medicare and SSI. They're on disability or something like that many times. And if not, then we do fund their expenses, their medical expenses. And we have a partnership with a dentist and an eye doctor and a primary care physician in Ames, and they all provide free services for our women.
This might be a follow-up to his question. I was wondering about if the young woman needs mental health services. Does that happen through Medicaid? Is it provided by the county? How does that work?
We have a relationship with a professional therapist. And so all of our women meet with her once a week. And then if there's substance abuse counseling that's needed, they meet with that person once a week. And again, yeah, provided through Medicaid or Medicare, or we will cover the cost of that. We have that included in our budget as well.
You answered all of our questions. Thank you so much for your time today. We are the lead sponsor for Raising Readers here. And if you guys would autograph the back of this book for us to donate to a child at their Well Baby check, we would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. And I think Karen's going to bring up the next slide. We are in need of sewing machines for the Afghan refugees. Karen, I'm not sure. The sewing machines, yes, but are they also taking? We are in need of sewing machines for the Afghan refugee support. There is a list of other items, small sharp scissors, assorted thread, seam ripper, extra universal machine needles, straight pins, hand sewing needles. Is that only if you donate a machine, Karen, or can people bring that in if they have it around the house, if it's not a machine? Okay. Okay, so for those of you tuning in online, Karen said that if you have any sewing machines at home that you'd like to donate or any of these sewing kits, she would pick them up for you. So take her up on that service. We would greatly appreciate it. Upcoming club meetings, we are having our Valentine's Day social next Monday. It's in person and just at the same time as our normal club meeting. Yes, and spouses or your sweetie, special attendees, we would love to host who would like to bring that day. And then the week after that is online. The next 2 weeks, and then we're back March 7th. No program next week, just a social. So it'll be a lot like our Christmas or holiday social, excuse me, last month. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, thank you. Okay, let's stand for the four-way test. The things we do and say, is it the truth?